I would be remiss if I did not recognize one person in particular who was instrumental in making this report and today's event possible, and that is Ivelisse Estrada.
Yay.
Thank you, Ivelisse, and thank you, Univision Communications, Inc., for making today possible. One of the observations that was highlighted in the report is the important role that Hispanic media has played as a source of information and guidance to key sectors of the Latino community. As such, Hispanic media continues to be an important partner, along with English language media, in any Hispanic outreach effort. On that note, I would like next to invite Roberto Llamas of Univision Communications, Inc. to share some remarks. Bob is a Hispanic leader in his own right and is Executive Vice President and Corporate Officer, Human Resources and Community Empowerment at Univision. Please join me in welcoming Bob to the podium.
Thank you, Abigail, and thank you for your leadership on the Latino Society program. And to our good friend Monica Lozano, I just knew that if you were going to get involved in something really good would come out. Thank you very much. And we had a good meeting with CEO Isaacson this morning, and also with Elliot. And just the commitment and the ability to do something with Aspen is terrific for us. We're proud to support and add our voice to Unlocking Latino Civic Potential. We've been unlocking potential and empowering Latinos at Univision for 55 years. Through our Univision Contigo platform, through our digital platform, through all of our entertainment and news, and also through the 140 television and radio stations that we have out in our community. We look to empower Latinos to have greater attainment in education, prosperity, health, and civic engagement. Because like you, we know Latinos are on the move. Abigail gave you some statistics. The ones that I like are 1 in 4 school-aged children, 2 to 3 times more likely to start a small business, and 66,000 Latinos turning 18 voting age every month. These numbers are compelling, and they create momentum, opportunity, but also responsibility. None of that is greater than our potential, or Latino community's potential, to civically increase our civic engagement. I love the manner in which the program has been organized, the 4 areas you'll hear about today. It is comprehensive, straightforward, and actionable. We look forward to the discussion today, and you can count on Univision for our support to the program and also in aligning our vast 2016 civic engagement plans with yours. If I might just highlight a few. In information and programming, our news will soon be launching its public relations statement related to Destino 2016, in which we will bring our award-winning news and our entertainment across all of our platforms to encourage voter registration, naturalization, and voting. You also can expect us to put it across all our major tentpole events or entertainment and network specials. Secondly, we'll provide a lot of tools. Yesterday, we introduced a texting platform in which people will be able to go on and get great information that leads them from voter registration, naturalization, right up to voting, and we'll also be able to query the system and receive answers to their questions. Soon we'll be introducing a voter engagement, which again is a digital platform, state-of-the-art, which allow Latinos to go from registering online to preparing themselves for the election, including local events and candidates, all the way to voting. And finally, we will hit it hard, as we always do in the community. I mentioned we have 140 stations. We're out there all the time. In 1 year, we convene 2 million people at our events, and we'll do it around voter registration, we'll do it around naturalization, we'll do it around mobilizing the voter turnout. We consider 2016 to be a tremendous and significant year for Latinos. You can't get it back. It's every 4 years. We're at the verge of making yet another difference in the presidential, swing state, and local campaigns, and we have to be encouraging. Our themes, and in working with our partners, are going to be first and foremost to create a sense of urgency and purpose. Secondly, a responsibility and an ownership in this country, because it is ours as much as anyone else's. And third, a responsibility and a pledge to engage others to register to vote and to vote along with you. Particularly, and finally, voting for those people who can't. School-aged children who are many times mired in schools that aren't performing for them, or Latinos who live in the shadows. So another big emphasis of ours is vote for those people who can't. Let me close by saying that we're excited about 2016, the opportunity for Latinos and for this particular program, and we look forward to working with you for getting the vote out, for changing America, changing the future for our children and for Latinos. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. My name is Monica Lozano. I am the chair of the Latinos in Society program here at the Aspen Institute, and we welcome you. Very exciting to have you with us as we release the findings of this report, Unlocking Latino Civic Potential 2016 and beyond. If there are folks in the back who can't see or who need chairs, please move forward because we do have some chairs up in front. To get us kicked off, as you heard in the opening remarks, civic participation is essential to a healthy democracy, to the strengthening of our institutions, and undeniably the role that Latinos will play over time because of the growing population and because of our influence across this country. It will only continue to grow. And here we are just days before the first ballots are cast for a presidential candidate. And while this report doesn't just focus specifically on voting, it touches on a whole series of other things, it is important to put it in that context, as you've just heard from Bob Llamas from Univision. 55 million strong across the country, concentrated in states that either have large numbers of electoral votes or are those battleground states that can really make a difference if Latino turnout potential is achieved. And yet at the same time that we know we have this potential, we also have a large number of those who are eligible to vote and who don't turn out to vote. That is one of the key challenges. So this discussion today, obviously delving into the issue of voting because of the timing and because voting is such an important indicator of civic participation, but we go beyond voting because we understand it's not just a single act, but it's a continuum of behavior. It's the creating of civic identity that we need to engage with early and continue on over time so that this becomes not just sustainable, but the impact and the influence of Latinos across the country really is realized. So we'll talk about voting, but we're also going to identify and delve into other indicators of civic health. Volunteering, advocacy, community organizing, naturalization rates, political leadership, and other topics. There's some of the folks that participated in our convening in the audience, but this expert panel also participated with us. And while we acknowledged as a group barriers to overcome in participation, we also identified, and they were challenged to identify, innovative, collaborative, and actionable strategies that strengthen the work that's already underway and identifies ways to boost these rates of civic participation. So unlocking Latino civic potential beyond 2016 has to be considered in that broader context. We take a long view, we look at institutional strategies that can be put in place and that survive beyond the electoral cycles that come along every 2 or 4 years. The conclusions of the group are grouped into 4 overarching themes, or promising practices: voter engagement, immigrant integration and naturalization, leadership development, and civic education. So we're going to discuss these 4 broad strategies with our panelists, and after their presentations and our conversation, we will open it up for questions, so be prepared. I want to start with our panelist, Luis Fraga, who is at my far left. Luis is a professor for transformative Latino leadership and co-director of the Institute for Latino Studies at Notre Dame University, a well-known expert in Latino politics and voting rights. Luis will cover civic engagement for us. Next to Luis is Cristina Jimenez, I think a familiar face to many. Cristina is co-founder and managing director of the United We Dream Network, the largest youth-led immigrant network in the country. And of course, their work was critical to the historic victory for the passage of DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Cristina will discuss the issue of leadership development. Josh Hoyt is the Executive Director for the National Partnership for New Americans, voice to 34 of the largest immigrant coalitions that work on immigrant integration and advancing those policies across the country. Josh will present the recommendations on immigrant integration and naturalization. And to my left is Arturo Vargas, Executive Director of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, a national organization for Latino policymakers, as well as the Executive Director of the NALEO Educational Fund. We're going to start with Arturo, who's going to lead us with the discussion of voting and political participation.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you all for being here. The Aspen Institute, Univision, for your support. And I think the context-setting comments that Abigail, Bob, and Monica laid out really give the imperative as to why the performance gap of civic participation between Latinos and non-Latinos is such an important challenge for this country. What I'd like to do first is to lay out some basic data, some context setting about who are the Latinos that we're talking about, these 55 million members of American society who now are nearly 18% of the US population. In this graph, I think the most obvious and challenging thing for us, that is both a challenge and an opportunity, is the youthfulness of the Latino population. You know, the Pew Hispanic Center just last week issued a report really focusing on the role of millennials in the Latino electorate. Well, this is not a surprise to those of us who have been working in the Latino community, who understand there was such a youthful population. And not being of voting age is one of the biggest barriers that Latinos have today to voting. But that will heal itself over time. And that's something that we need to prepare ourselves in doing so. And this is a comparison between the Latino and non-Latino age difference. We're also a very diverse community when it comes to our presence in this country by generation. Overwhelmingly, a US-born population. You see that first bar, over 35 million of the 55 million Latinos are US-born, and indeed, 94% of all Latinos 18 years of age and under are US-born. We're talking about a US-born population. You couple that population with the naturalized population, you get to over 40 million. And then you see we have populations that are eligible to become citizens today, those who are in the process of becoming eligible, and we do have a significant segment of our population that is unauthorized and ineligible to become citizens, to become voters, but that does not prevent them from other forms of civic participation, which I think my colleagues will be able to discuss. And the reason why the role of naturalized citizens, even though they are such a small percentage of the overall US citizen population of Latinos, is that they outperform native-born Latinos consistently. And this is not true of other immigrant groups. While other immigrant groups will have higher rates of naturalization, other immigrant groups do not have higher rates of electoral performance among their naturalized citizens. And that's true among Latinos, because there is a political context that exists in which Latinos become US citizens. And I know Josh is going to further elaborate on the barriers to citizenship and the process of becoming citizens. So that was in presidential elections. The same exists, I hope. There we go. In midterm elections, again, a performance gap between US-born Latinos and naturalized citizens in electoral performance. We lament quite a bit about the low performance in this country in the 2014 midterm elections. But look at the performance of naturalized citizens in that election. Almost no drop-off from the 2010 midterm election to 2014, which actually is quite remarkable given what the rates were in drop-off among Latino, US-born, and other segments of the American electorate. It was a poor election for everybody, but naturalized citizens continued in the consistency of their performance. And we have a challenge. Here is the current landscape of those who vote in our elections. This is the presidential elections, those who are registered to vote. But the line that I always highlight to all of us who work in voter engagement is the top line. How rapidly growing is our potential electorate. And the number of Latinos who every single day enter the electorate because they turn 18 years of age, they're healing that barrier of not yet being of citizen voting age over time. And they're in fact outpacing our voting population. And that is our biggest challenge. And that is consistent as well in our midterm elections. And here you see overall how the lack of performance by US-born Latinos really dragged down the overall performance of Latinos in the 2014 midterm elections. One of the things that my organization does as well is track the number of Latinos in elected office. And this is, I think, one of the bright spots, because over time we are seeing a significant increase of Latinos and Latinas who are being elected to city councils, to school boards, as mayors, county officials, state legislators. Now this only goes back to 1996, I believe. We started tracking the number of Latinos elected office beginning in 1984. I've only been there since 94. But you'll see that not only has there been a significant increase of Latinos as elected public servants, and this is only elected, not appointed, but also look at the increased share of Latinas among our elected leadership. And the role of Latinas in civic engagements is one that we'll be exploring.
Thank you very much, Arturo. So given that landscape, we're going to talk now with Josh, who's going to go through the section on immigrant integration and naturalization and some of the recommendations that came out of the report.
Sure. So our nation is somewhat bipolar in how it deals with its identity as a nation of immigrants. We celebrate the Statue of Liberty and the fact that we're the most successful experiment in world history in building a democracy of immigrants, and then every once in a while, we kind of lurch back into this paranoia and dark fear about, you name the group, the dirty Irish, the opium-smoking Chinese, the Bolshevik Jews, the anarchist Italians, and now rapist Mexicans and terrorist Muslims, right? We seem to be in one of those periods in this electoral cycle, and I really hope that the disinfectant of democracy will sweep that manure out of the stable. But what we have learned over these centuries is what actually works. And this report, Understanding Latino Civic Potential, really builds on that long history of common sense actions which allow immigrants and the native-born to strengthen our nation together. So our committee was the Immigrant Integration and Naturalization group, and the participants included Ivelisse Estrada from Univision and CM Samala, Jerry Mannion from the Carnegie Institute, and Reverend Tony Suarez. And we were asked to come up with actionable, innovative, creative, and collaborative strategies and some actual big ideas on how to move forward. And what we discussed was that for Latinos and for immigrants generally, there are on-ramps to actual civic participation. And two of the most important are English and naturalization. So the first big idea is a national call to action to teach English as a gateway to integration, citizenship, and financial literacy. We understand that nativists fear that immigrants don't want to learn English, and anybody that works in this space understands that that's absolutely ridiculous, that people come here to work and support their families, and the best way to increase your income is to learn English, only it's hard. And it's especially hard as you get older. It's the key to better jobs, being able to talk to your neighbors, being able to communicate with your own children who are growing up speaking English as their first language. And there are very inadequate resources to help people to do that. So the big idea is that after this year's elections, we will ask the former presidents Clinton and Bush to co-chair a national task force for English learning with CEOs, educators, community-based organizations, volunteer organizations like the AARP, the Girl Scouts United Way, so that we can build a national campaign for English acquisition. We would focus on contextualized learning, in other words, English that makes people's lives better quickly. convenient times, technology assistance, online learning, YouTube channels. We had a really nice mix of people in our group, with a goal of providing 300 hours of English language instruction, or making available 300 hours to every immigrant in the country, every Latino in the country, and trying to build a $200 million grant pool from the federal government to make this happen. The second big idea was to make naturalization the goal of our immigration national policy. Currently, there are 8.8 million immigrants who are eligible to naturalize, and unfortunately, Latinos, specifically Mexican immigrants, are the slowest to naturalize. There are about 3.5 million Latino immigrants who could be citizens by this election should they apply tomorrow. And actually, tomorrow, our group, together with Cristobal Alex, who I met at this forum, is making an announcement of 96 naturalization events across the country. The last big idea is a national effort to teach the skills of immigrant economic integration, financial literacy, path to home ownership, the basics of business formation. We think that these three big ideas help to create a real on-ramp for civic engagement.
Thank you, Josh. Christina, the section on leadership development that you led.
Well, thanks so much for having me here. I really enjoyed our discussion at Aspen, and happy to see some of the faces of the group here. We had a very dynamic group thinking about, we know that it's important for every community, particularly the Latino community, to be engaged. And first of all, we thought about civic engagement in a much more broader way. So civic engagement not only as the act of voting, as coming out or running for office, but rather to think about how young people or how children in their churches, in their schools, or in their families feel empowered. And what I raised in our conversation was, when is the first moment that young people or children have a taste of power? And I know Luis will talk more about that discussion, but in thinking about my own experience with United We Dream and the immigrant youth movement, one of the conversations that we had was about how do we develop a sustainable leadership development movement so that young people, Latinos, can not only be community organizers or volunteers or active in our communities or go to vote, but they can actually also legislate and run for office and represent our communities. So we were looking at the pipeline, within that stretch, children from running for office, and how does that look like, and how we, as a community of Latinos, sustains that leadership pipeline. I mean, think about it, right? We're 17% of the population, but only 1% of elected officials are Latinos, or look like me, or like you in the room. So that's why the conversation ended up with that goal as part of the goal in mind. The three things that we thought about were, one, how to sustain the leadership development pipeline that has leaks, actually. And one of the things that we talked about was organizing and also looking at programs like AmeriCorps and others that engage young people from organizing to volunteerism to also developing leadership skills. Second, how do we get our young people to be elected? And you don't have to be a senator, state rep. You could start also at commissions, at boards, at community boards. So how do we make that possible? And third, we know that our community goes to church a lot, and we're big donors at the church. Raise your hand if you know people that give donations at church every Sunday. Yeah, many of you in the room. So how do we get them to take it to the next step and give to organizing, to developing a political infrastructure, and to candidates? And how do we get to build an infrastructure that is not only grassroots, but that also gets at the super PAC level? So developing candidates and engaging our community and also giving was the third big idea that we had.
Thank you, Christina. Luis, the section on civic education.
Thank you very much, Monica, and thank you to the Aspen Institute, to everyone who participated in our group, and especially to my fellow panelists for giving us the opportunity to think critically and carefully about what our next steps will be. Our working group on civic education decided that it wanted to focus not just on immediate opportunities that might exist for different segments of our Latino populations to better engage civically, but we wanted to directly enrich the foundation upon which all civic engagement stands. So we wanted to make sure that we spent time thinking carefully, given the sorts of numbers that Arturo referred to earlier about the youth of our population, but given what we know about the stages of social development of our youth and of our adults and of our communities generally, we wanted to make sure that we spent time thinking about and understanding what would it take to make long-term investments to enrich that foundation of civic education. We came up with 3 ideas. First, we came up with the idea of establishing what we called civic dream zones. Civic dream zones would take 2 communities or 2 schools, small, 2 communities or 2 schools, secure the funding to try to make these particular communities, perhaps again based in a school, as models and examples of what it would take to promote civic engagement within a predominantly Latino community. The idea of the civic dream zones, in other words, is to provide an evidentiary foundation for learning what works and what doesn't work, but to do it at a scale that is manageable. And to provide then the evidence of what works for encouraging participation, but also learn what doesn't work for participation in those civic dream zones. But what would they promote? What programs would they have? That's our idea number 2. Our idea number 2 is for a Latino Action Civics program and resource bank. Here, our idea was to bring together what we know from many of the panelists and many in the audience about what they have tried to promote greater civic engagement on the part of our communities, and to document that, work through that, see what it is that actually works, and have that as a resource bank from which then those leading the establishment of our civic dream zones would be able to learn from and offer, if you will. And an important part of the logic of this resource bank is that it would be segmented by subdivisions of, if you will, our Latino market. We would have a focus on K through 6th grade for children to particularly understand the importance of identity with family, community, and culture as a part of civic engagement. We would have a focus on middle school children, grades 7 and 8, where they would have the opportunity to learn about their relationships with authority and the need to develop respect for themselves, be respected by institutions, but also show respect for others. It would have a focus on high school and adults, focusing on traditional voting and other forms of traditional civic engagement. The third idea that we have then, because there's a concern we had, okay, nice to start small, learn, have this great set of resources, but how do we scale it up? And our idea there is to offer the opportunity for us to develop a national civic education campaign. The National Civic Education Campaign is a simultaneous opportunity to challenge Latino communities to look toward their own futures, but to also challenge traditional American social institutions to understand the importance of Latinos for their own success. So you notice it's dual, right? It's not just for Latinos, it's for American institutions as well. To conclude, what we focused on in our working group on Latino civics education was trying to provide substance to what we know is the reason that many Latinos come and continue to come to the United States, whatever generation back your family came. You'd come to the country to provide greater opportunities for your children. You come to the country to provide greater opportunities, if your children, for your younger siblings, and in fact, for your parents. We think this is a message that can be used to develop that National Civic Education Campaign. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all. And again, I would urge you to read the report. It's full of very specific tactics and strategies and recommendations. Arturo, I actually want to come back to you to start because you laid out the challenge. You know, there is a large gap between those who are eligible and those who actually turn out. And some of the recommendations of the report looked at removing structural barriers. What would some of those structural barriers be? And in many ways, these recommendations have to be owned by somebody. Who would own the recommendations that we make around some of the mechanisms that would make voting easier for Latinos?
Well, our voter engagement group also had 3 big ideas about how to cure this lack of electoral performance. The fact remains that in order to be able to vote, you need to be registered. And there are almost as many Latino adult U.S. citizens who are unregistered to vote in the country today as there are Latino adult U.S. citizens who are registered to vote. So removing the registration obstacle is the first challenge we need to take head on. One of the big ideas we had is we need to have a national voter registration campaign, where this is something that everybody does who's eligible in this country, is to register to vote. We don't do that as a country. We also need to have efforts to remove structural barriers to voter registration. Things like implementing automatic registration or ensuring that a young student, the minute that person turns 18, gets registered to vote. Now, we need some safeguards in these processes to make sure that nobody who is ineligible to vote is not inadvertently registered. But again, if we look at the large populations of citizens we have, we can register, we should register people who are eligible to vote. Finally, we need to admit there is an underinvestment in Latino voter mobilization. I've been in this business now for over 30 years. And in 3 decades of my work, I have yet to see a single campaign that significantly invests in moving Latino voters. And when there is money invested in moving Latino voters, it's always simply about that next November. Well, this isn't about that next November. This is about making sure we create a new culture of participation where Latinos participate year in and year out, because elections are held every single year. Not even just in the years that end in even numbers. Every year we have elections in this country, and we do not invest in mobilizing people. So if nobody comes up to you and asks for your vote and invites you into the process, you're not going to take up on that non-existent invitation.
Josh, this question around naturalization, which some of the barriers may be similar. It costs a lot. There are both psychological impediments, but there are also structural impediments. There's a 3.5 million, I think you said, who could become naturalized and eventually find a path to citizenship through that route. What are the barriers to naturalization? And one of the recommendations was the creation of an Office of Citizenship Services. What would they do differently than what's currently being offered by the USCIS?
So naturalization is actually something that Arturo is one of the most tenacious workers on over the years, because he understands that this is the on-ramp. The barriers are threefold. The first is the actual cost. It's $680 to become a citizen, and if you're working poor, which 52% of those who are eligible are, that's a lot of money. And it's actually cheaper to renew your green card, and so they've created a disincentive at USCIS for the working poor to become citizens. Second main barrier is English, and that's one of the ones that we've addressed here. And the third main barrier is fear of failing the test and sort of ambivalence about how hard is this, lack of information. So these are the kinds of things which can be addressed through concerted campaigns. A partner in that campaign, a full partner with the full support of the government, should be the United States Citizenship Information Service and Immigration Services, USCIS. They do lots of good work providing information, but the goal of that agency is not to help people to become citizens. That's not the way in which they articulate. If you choose to become a citizen, there's resources available. We need to turn that around. Our nation will be stronger if immigrants do speak English, can have access to legal status, and can be citizens with the full rights and responsibilities. This kind of multi-classes of less than Americans who work and sweat and pay taxes is not a good thing for our nation.
You know, I'm intrigued by, across all four of these conversations is the theme of the youthfulness of our population. And so, you know, 80,000 who turn 18 every month. I think it's 800,000 a year who turn 18 and become eligible. So there is a cohort that, as Cristina and Luis says, need to be touched very early on if, in fact, you're going to activate them. Cristina, you led, or were part of, a youth-led movement. And you talked about not just unlocking potential, but unlocking power. What did you mean by that? And what are you seeing within the movements of young people that can be built upon to actually deal with this, both opportunity and what is a real challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was saying, what I was trying to say with not thinking of civic engagement in a narrow way and thinking of it in a very expansive way, is because of the experience of the immigrant youth movement and United We Dream. You've seen young people who are not citizens, who do not have the right to vote, who can't vote right now. However, they've become community leaders. We've organized our community. We've changed policy. We've made history. And now you even see immigrant youth working in political campaigns, activating other folks to come, coming out to vote, and even running for local elected office like boards and commissions at the local level. So when I say unlocking that power, that's what I mean. Sources of power are not only about electoral power, but also about the community organizing and bringing our communities together. And for me, coming from a place of feeling really invisible in our communities and very disenfranchised to a place where I had power, I was visible, and I was building something important and fighting for my community with others that had a shared vision.
Who would be the primary carriers of a message that would resonate with young people? Luis, you talked about these dream zones and being able to work through the schools. Are the schools the primary place by which we can activate some of this potential for young people?
I think our focus has to be multi-level. Schools are definitely one place. Acknowledging that schools have basically dropped the ball with regards to civics education. There's a reason that schools have done this. Part of it was the response to the way in which schools were used to Americanize immigrants, causing them to remove themselves from culture and language and the imposition of an American set of values. One of the downsides of not allowing for some strategic elements of that Americanization is this distancing from American institutions, and especially a distancing from empowerment and understanding your capacity to access, influence, and impact social institutions. So schools are one place, but we can't just depend on schools. Anyone who works with schools, as I do, knows that schools are very bureaucratic, they're rigid, they're under state law. So you also have to work with community-based organizations, including social organizations. Churches certainly is a very important place where you allow the sort of leadership, youth-oriented leadership, but it has to be adults and it has to be youth at different levels being given the opportunity to make that call to bring others to participate in our civic institutions. It has to be multi-level, multifaceted, and there has to be leadership shown at all of these different levels.
Josh, did you want to jump in? I thought you were going to
No, I was
tag on.
looking at Christina, because who do you think the messengers that would bring youth into this conversation would be?
Well, I think from our experiences, young people themselves, right?
No question.
From our experiences, being young people themselves. I mean, we were sharing this at the Aspen gathering actually, and in one of my groups we share. Is it really exciting when you go to another young person? You're like, oh, become powerful by registering to vote. It doesn't click right away, but if you create a space where young people feel safe, where they can speak for the first time to an audience, where they can share their story for the first time, and they have also role models, right? So folks like myself and others that have been pioneers in the immigrant youth movement have inspired many to get engaged. So I think that those messengers are also young people.
So Arturo, how does an organization like yours adapt to this reality where you've been in this since 1984, you said, you've been doing the work. There are certainly challenges on the funding. We're going to get to that. We're also going to talk about the role of political parties, the candidates, and the campaigns themselves. But in terms of the message and adopting the right message and being able to turn on through the right sorts of platforms, that it's not just about, and we've partnered on this, become a citizen, register to vote. It's creating that sense of civic participation, perhaps at a community level before you even have the opportunity to vote. What is it that NALEO and other organizations are doing to adapt?
Well, one of the things you need to do is not assume you know the answers. And when we started doing this work, we assumed that we knew what the messages were that would get Latinos to vote. And we had mailers and messages that were very ethnic focused, very much about, make yourself powerful by voting. And as we explored those messages through focus groups and polling, we realized those weren't resonating with Latinos. Latinos wanted messages that recognize them as Americans, as being patriotic, and being able to participate in the process. And in fact, it wasn't necessarily the sports figure that was going to be compelling to somebody with a voter engagement message. It was a school teacher. It was a first responder. It was a Latino or Latina in military uniform, because these people actually had skin in the game. And the other thing we learned in our work is that there is a strong and powerful role for Latinas in motivating the Latino community to participate civically. And that's something that we want to explore in this election, is how do we not reach Latinas and encourage them to vote, but Latinas as messengers of voter engagement, getting people in their households and their communities to vote. There is a powerful Latino strategy we need to exploit.
Luis and then Josh.
Just very briefly, we all know who the real community organizers have been. Historically, in the present, at all different levels. Maybe not the ones who get the acknowledgement, the ones who do the real work of going out and knocking on the doors, doing the work, doing the mailing, it's women.
Yeah.
Use that as a resource, as Arturo said.
Yeah. Something I will lift up to this conversation is what you were saying, Arturo, right? Like the message of come out to vote, it doesn't necessarily resonate with people right away. But when you talk to folks about issues that they care about, so when you're knocking on people's doors and they're telling you that they're still feeling the impact of their recession, they're still struggling with jobs, they worry about their family member that will be undocumented, they worry about their children's school, those are the issues that in many ways like hook people and engage people in a conversation. And our job as community organizers, many of us who do that work, is to build people up to understanding also other sources of power like registering, like voting.
And that's very labor intensive.
Yes.
And that's something we haven't invested in.
That's right.
One of the things that Arturo talked about earlier was the fact that the current political system is set up so that parties are focused on the next election and only on swing states. And so that puts states like Texas, California, usually Illinois, at a tremendous disadvantage, although there are many Latinos there. And so challenging the way in which this civic engagement funding happens is important to be able to create the structures that allow us to do the work. The one thing I wanted to add to what Christina has said is we were very successful in Illinois with messages of solidarity, where a picture of a child saying they call our parents illegals, let's register, let's vote for the future. Messages of solidarity work very, very well. And then who are the best messengers? We created a program, New Americans Democracy Project, in which young people were actually doing the political organizing. And we registered a lot of people, and the right wing said we were registering undocumented people to vote. And they were absolutely wrong. We were not doing that. But the young people doing the registration, were undocumented. They didn't have it quite right. So that creating structures through which people can participate, where they can bring their best, and which encourages solidarity within the community is extremely effective in our experience.
Well, I want to open it up to questions. We've got maybe about 15, 20 minutes left. If anybody has questions, please raise your hand and they'll bring the mic over. And there's a lot of subjects that we haven't touched on, so hopefully we'll be able to explore those. Can somebody bring a mic up here? There we go. Thank you. And if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luis Maldonado. I'm with the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. First of all, I think the report is great. I'm really looking forward to reading it. Thank you for doing this work. I think it illustrates a lot of potential and areas of work that we need to do and get engaged in. But I also want to highlight something that I think is missing from the report, and that relates to the engagement of Hispanics in higher education. There are 435 colleges and universities today that have 25% or more Hispanic enrollment. Those 3 million Hispanic students who are in college today go to 60% of these schools. They are concentrated. And if we're looking at key states like Colorado, Nevada, and Florida, there are HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions, in both of those 3 states. Similarly, Hispanics out-enroll whites today in higher education. They're only second to Asian Americans. So we are concentrating in a small number of institutions, relatively speaking, And they're waiting there for the opportunity, for the guidance, for the opportunity, for the program, for the support to engage in registering and understanding why it's important to participate civically. And, not surprisingly, there are more Latinas than Latinos in higher ed, similarly to all of higher education. So we all understand the value of females in the Latino family. They're in college today. Let's go after them. Let's include them in these initiatives.
Thank you, Luis.
Thank
Did
you.
you want to say something, Luis?
I'll just say just a slight modification in what you pointed to. There are more Latinos enrolled than other groups of high school graduates. Our lower graduation rate, our lower high school, secondary school graduation rate still puts us at a deficit relative to some of our comparison groups. But there's no reason that universities couldn't be one of the focuses of the civic dream zone that we're talking about. If universities accepted that responsibility, having been in higher education for 30 years, I can tell you, universities do not see themselves as centers with responsibility for promoting civic education. It would be great if they did. If you know of universities, if HSIs would like to do that and would like to engage and would like to use it to structure a set of community relationships with the neighborhoods from which their students come, which HSIs have the opportunity to do, it would fit perfectly with our idea of using, in this case, a university as a center for the development of a civic dream zone.
Thank you. We had another question in the back.
Yeah, my name's Luis Sidabaca, and I actually didn't plan to just do a follow-up, but it kind of became one. You know, that's exactly what New Mexico State University did back in the 30s and 40s with the Cooperative Extension Service, and that is what transformed our communities in New Mexico. My dad became one of the first Chicano PhDs in the country because his 4-H leader pushed him to go to New Mexico State, and the Latino professor down there pushed him to go to graduate school. And I think that one of the questions that I'd like to ask then is, you talked about the Girl Scouts as one example of doing English stuff. It seems to me like if we're looking at just the voting as civic engagement, that's one thing. But 4-H, Girl Scouts, all of those things give kids as young as 9 the opportunities to start having leadership within their communities, and it brings their parents in so they can be 4-H leaders and other things like that. Now, maybe that's more of an rural-urban issue, but I was in Iowa last week. We met with folks from the Latino community, and I gave a speech at a Rotary, and those were not the two different, same people at all. But I can tell you who controls that town that we were in was those folks in the Rotary Club. So getting kids involved in those social organizations that turn into the JCs, Rotaries, et cetera, which in many ways run the United States.
As we talked about the issue of integration, that's why we ended up with coming up with the English idea. We thought, okay, if there is one big idea which is a good point of entry for people who are of goodwill from within the immigrant community and from outside the immigrant community, getting people together, helping each other is a good place to start. And so that a national task force on English would be a place in which you could actually build relationships between the people in the Rotary and the Latino kids in the high school, and that will make it it will serve a practical use of getting more people practice speaking English. It will serve a even deeper use of building relationships across race, and therefore more solidarity.
But I do think that it's important to one, recognize the leadership development opportunity that comes from participating in these kinds of organizations. And we as a community can seek them out and identify those. Those institutions can seek us out. And that's one of the things that I think strategically we can think about creating those sorts of partnerships. We have a rich network of Hispanic serving organizations. Those that don't consider themselves necessarily Hispanic serving probably should, just by the very nature of the demographics, the youthfulness, the extension across the country. So one of the things that we've recommended are these cross-cultural partnerships. It's very important for Latino children in particular to feel that they have the opportunity to exert some kind of leadership, and it can start off in these kinds of organizations. And I think it's up to us and institutions even like Aspen to be able to help those other institutions recognize and begin to reflect and do the real kind of outreach that I think is required. Christina, did you want to say
I would
something?
only add that that was actually all part of the conversation of some of the groups. And so I know that in the report you only get to so much. But in the groups, we had to recognize all of the different institutions that we have in our communities. I mean, you have a Latina leading, the Scouts organization, national organization as well. And so thinking about how we think of churches, schools, community-based organizations, in a broad perspective, because we're going to need all of them, right? So I feel like on the last two comments is a yes and. And in the experience with United We Dream, for example, 80% of the young people that we organize and that are leading organizing efforts in their campus or their community are in college. So colleges and universities, whether the institutions are supportive of organizing efforts or not, are really a fertile ground for leadership development for folks in our community.
Can you hear me?
It's getting, because we're recording, you have to use a mic, so. En español no funciona. You have to speak English acá. A ver. Ahí está, ya sí, ahora sí.
Me asusté por un momento. My name is John Moreno Escobar. I'm a leader in New York City. Came all the way from New York. It's a long story. Glad to see Christina and Arturo, which I worked with in the past with Julissa in New York, and with Christina with the movement of DACA and the Dreamers. I have maybe like one question with a little extra part on it, like a good Latino, but I don't want to take too much time. The first question is, so we have the report. I mean, we know the numbers. We know what's happening in the nation. We know what's happening in our own states. After this report, what is next? What's the next step? Because we get into a lot of these events, fancy events, non-fancy events, community events. What's next? I'm tired to hear maybe many years the same, dropper rates, DACA. What are we going to do to pass the DREAM Act? What's happening after this report? That's my first point. Then the little question about this is how we could get involved. So there's a lot of young Latinos that were part of a lot of movements. I was part of the higher education access in New York for Latinos in CUNY. How we could get involved with the Aspen Institute and the Latino and Society program, and how organizations that we support or that we have contact with could actually be part of this movement. So I don't know if anyone could
Yeah,
take
let me answer
Gracias.
part of that. Thank you, Luisa. Good question. So, and like a good Latina, I'll answer it in multiple parts also. So part of the intent was to bring not the usual suspects together, because we do understand that there are networks that are collaborating and moving forward in lots of ways. You've got media working with community-based organizations who are doing outreach. So we broadened that network and already have seen reflected even through some of the partnerships that we've talked about here, they are taking these recommendations and now extending them, whether it's working through higher education institutions or with veterans or with millennials. So that was one of the intents, not to own all of these recommendations and then act on them at the Aspen Institute, but to pull people together who can then move those forward. Secondly, we have identified some large strategies that we think could actually move the needle that nobody has owned yet. The English acquisition concept as a demonstration of our commitment to our Americanism is a really powerful concept. And so how we can talk to other organizations to take that to fruition is clearly at the top of our agenda here, working either through Aspen or through other organizations. There's a couple of strategies like that. How you can get involved with the Aspen Institute Latinos in Society program, we intend this to be the first of many convenings. It would include convenings like this that are very specific to specific issues, as well as convenings regionally where we can take Aspen. The ultimate goal is to influence how Aspen does its work, defines policy areas, and then interprets solutions. The best way for Aspen to be representative of all communities is for our voice to be at the table. And this is one way in which we're doing that. The fact that you're all here today is important for Aspen. We would hope to connect you to other programs that Aspen is doing, not just our Latinos program. If you're doing work in higher ed, there's programs like that. If you're doing work in citizenship, there's other programs there. So that is the goal, is to connect you to a new network that you may not have been associated with prior to this. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Audrey Singer from Brookings. What a great conversation you guys must have had in Aspen. We all wish we could have been there. And I think you've uncovered
It was all work. It was all work.
You've uncovered and developed some great recommendations. One of the kind of pre-existing conditions of developing civic engagement and a new electorate is motivations, individual motivations that people have to, say, get involved and ultimately naturalize. And it's something we don't know a lot about. And I'm sure you all talked about it there. There's a little bit of literature on this, and it breaks down in a couple of important ways for this discussion going forward and going deeper. And people have very instrumental reasons for naturalizing. To move in that direction and then to actually do it. They want to vote, they want to get the blue passport, they want to be able to travel freely between the US and their home country. But people also have emotional and affective reasons for ultimately naturalizing. And therein, those two buckets lie some of the barriers. Josh touched on a few of them, but there are these other more emotional barriers that prevent people from engaging and then going the next step to naturalizing and then registering to vote. And that's the deeper conversation that we have to have within communities, within schools, and within families. And I think it's maybe on your agenda in the future, but it is something that's very hard to grasp and to figure out the mechanisms to move that forward. And I just wanted to put that on the table.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Does anybody want to pick up, Luis, or anything?
I just want to say two quick things. So on Luis's question, at the Aspen gathering, many of us actually came out there with very concrete ideas for partnerships and ideas. One of them being, like, I know Cristobal was here from Latino Victory Project. How are we going to train Latinos to run for office? And how do we create that pipeline, for example? So there are those conversations happening. So there are some exciting partnerships that actually came out of the Aspen gathering. To get to the point that you were making, I feel like that resonates a lot with the work that we do at United We Dream, where we have done work to mobilize voters in districts with low propensity of folks that turn out. And we just share our stories. That has shared as a motivation, that has served as motivation for folks. When we have said, I cannot vote, but you could vote to protect my family from deportation, that has been really powerful. And when you think about 700,000 folks that have DACA, 50% of them have a US citizen family member that they will motivate to come out to the polls. I mean, I've seen it in my own family, where folks have become US citizens even though they didn't want to for, other reasons, like not giving away their citizenship, which I'm sure that you will, from their own country, which you've heard. But because of what's at stake for our communities, that has been a very strong source of motivation for folks.
Yes. And I would just say, Audrey, while they're passing the mic, historically there was the tendency to say, I'm going to go back, the idea that there was that cyclical migration. We've seen that really come to an end. So now it does become more the personal motivations. We wanted to better understand sort of institutional structural barriers, because moving the needle on personal motivation is much harder to do, certainly from an organizational point of view. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Priscilla Lujan. I'm from Colorado, and my friend here from New Mexico. When you live in the West, there's information among a lot of people that names like San Diego, San Francisco, Santa Fe means that they were not named by the colonists. And it appears to me that we need some media information to low information non-Latinos who clump us all in this bucket. And on a regular basis, I'm told or asked, where are you from? Where are your parents from? Hello, does anybody know of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848? I came to a wonderful session here at Aspen on cultural identity. And the professor that wrote this seminal book in 1987 was from UVA. And he was here and doing what do Americans need to know for the 21st century. And I was astonished that there wasn't one word in there that said Hispanic. There wasn't one word that said all Americans should know the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So I won't have to educate people who you assume have information because they were educated at Ivy League places. And at the Department of State, after working there 16 years for my clearance, I was asked if I was a real American, meaning I informed the gentleman who had low information that Colorado was formed in 1876. And I think there's a lot of non-Latinos
let's
who
wrap up.
don't know
Thank
about
you.
us.
So that is precisely one of the reasons and the purpose for programs like Aspen. We've got a whole group of questions. Please make them questions. We only have about 5 more minutes. This, sir, yes, sir, right here. Right here, this gentleman right here.
Hi, I'm Eric Palladini from the Latino GLBT History Project. I just want to throw in a word and ask if you've considered those groups that are members of the Latino community who are Afro-descended, indigenous. In other words, not Hispanic, not descended from a Spanish-speaking community, but indigenous, and also the sexual minorities, transgender and GLBT, and other GLBT members of the other GLBT community. I just wanted to throw that out and ask you to, if those communities are also part of your agenda.
They were not an explicit focus of any that I'm aware of any of our subgroups, but nothing that we said did not fully acknowledge the diversity that our communities are and the increasing diversity that is contained within our communities. We did, however, not develop specific, that I know of, strategies or recommendations to specific subsets of our Latino communities. We tried to stay at the level of broader and cross-sector sorts of recommendations, but it was not with any intent of assuming any type of homogenization of ideologies or backgrounds or interests or needs or views of any sort.
And I do think we very clearly acknowledge the need to have distinct strategies depending on the different groups that we were targeting. But your point is well taken, and absolutely. Let's take 2 more questions from the back, and we've only got a couple more minutes. We'll close out here.
Hi, my name is Sarah Dallo, and I'm the new political and field director at Rock the Vote. So I'm excited that this is an amazing event. Thank you so much for hosting it. I'm curious about if folks, and I came in a little late, so sorry if you covered it, if folks talk about strategies for targeting non-college Latino youth. At first, this is one of the first times I've heard talking about Latinos broadly. We're actually focusing quite a bit on young people, which is amazing and something I think our community should have been doing for a long time. But yeah, if you have talked about strategies for that population in particular, I'd love to hear more about that.
Maybe we can pick that up because we did touch on that. Luis, I think your group spent a lot of time talking about younger people K through 6 and then beyond. Oh, after they're 18, I'm sorry. Yeah, oh, after college. I'm sorry, I misinterpreted the question.
Yeah, that was part of some,
Yes, go ahead,
there was some
Christina.
discussion in the leadership development pipeline, but again, I think we recognize that not all Latinos are in college or in high school. They're not, and sometimes they dropped off of some institutions where we can organize folks and engage them, right? We did not develop specific strategies, but I will say that when we thought about the leadership development pipeline, we thought about it broadly, and that's why churches, community-based organizations, service providers were part of that landscape.
And when we talked about 17, 18-year-olds as in a very critical period, high school-age students in a critical period, and needing to provide them opportunities to understand their potential power as voters, we weren't making it specific to college educated or not college educated, right? The 800,000 figure, 800,000 Latinos turn 18 every year is a huge pool that we need to do everything, whatever their subsequent secondary or post-secondary education choices are, right, or opportunities are, a huge pool that needs to be all empowered to see themselves as having a responsibility to be able to contribute to their communities, to their families, to their younger siblings, and to their parents.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question. I know we're out of time, but then I'm going to come back, and you guys think about this while we're taking the question. One thing that you would recommend in terms of unlocking potential, not just the voting potential, but civic engagement potential over the long term. Carrie?
Hi, Carrie Lopez, representing Hispanos Organized for Political Equality. Thank you to Aspen for including hope in this. My question relates back to what Audrey was speaking about, and one of the things I love about the report is that it poses the questions about what we don't know that's going to help in this, as a lot of us have heard these recommendations in some form or fashion, but we have to keep making the case. So these research questions of what we don't know that help make the case, I'm specifically interested in the leadership development part, connection with civic engagement and policy, what you all see as those missing pieces of information and data that will continue to help us in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think to get started, some of the pieces that we lifted as questions for research is understanding what motivates our people to give, for example. If we know that they give in church, every Sunday or when they go, what is it that is going to drive our community to also be supportive of community organizing, of candidates, and eventually joining political or electoral infrastructures. So that was a big question that we had. We also had a question about what moves young people versus the older crowd that we needed to do more research around.
So I would, the way the report is organized lays out challenges, lots of strategies that we think, if collapsed, really can move the needle. And then to the point that was just made, there's data that's required. And so there are some specific research needs that hopefully by collaborating with some of our academic institutions, we'll be able to get some answers. We're going to do the little lightning round. Luis, we'll start with you. If there was one thing that you would recommend that unlocks Latino civic potential.
I think we have to re-embrace the aspirations of Latinos in being in the United States and coming to the United States, choosing to remain in the United States or choosing to come to the United States. And that's that our community comes here for opportunity, and we need to begin a discussion that everyone who is not civically engaged is preventing the next generation from being able to realize the dreams that brought us or our ancestors here in the first place. We have to take ownership of that responsibility, and I think our community is ready to have that discussion and would respond very favorably.
I've talked about this a lot in all of my remarks, but creating the opportunities for children and young people to have that moment of a taste of power and empowerment, and building that leadership development pipeline.
So when you asked the question, I was thinking, you know, we actually know a lot of what works, and getting deeper investments and doing it much more broadly would make a huge difference. But then the reason that those investments don't come is because of the lack of power. And so I think that with or without those investments, the organizing that NALEO does, United We Dream does, we do, is what we have to double down on. More power will mean more recognition and more resources.
What I would say is I think we need to recognize that this is a heavy lift. And what we're talking about is civic engagement. And it's, when it comes to voting, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not this whole notion that, oh, Latinos come from these other countries where democracy doesn't exist, so they don't believe in democracy here. That's not it. And no one's asleep either, okay? There's no Gulliver here. What it is we have a system that does not promote civic engagement in this country. We don't invest in Latino mobilization. And what we have learned is when we talk to people who are not registered to vote, who speak only English, who know only this country, and we ask them about voting, they don't have faith in our political system. They don't believe voting makes a difference in their lives. And that's the challenge we have. We have to change our political system into one where people actually believe that participating in it will make a difference for them.
And I hope that this has given you some answers to that inevitable question that comes up every 4 years, which is, why doesn't the Latino community flex their political muscle? And what about voter turnout? It is not just about that single act of voting. It's about systemic strategies that demonstrate an investment as a country, not just in this community, but in all communities, for active participation by its citizenry. So thank you very much for being here, and great conversation.
Great job, guys. Hola, so good to see you. I want to introduce you to my co-estás, ¿Te vas?
No, tú te vas.
From the state of Illinois. And one of the biggest things that, from an election perspective, is engaging people in those midterms, because it's in the congressional districts that gerrymandering happens. Yes. So. And we have to do what we have to do.